Hey everyone, and welcome back to Nat Chat, where we're exploring what to do as a college student or recent graduate who is dissatisfied with the existing system of grades, resumes, and one-size-fits-all careers, and who's looking to build a lifestyle that they're more excited about instead. In this episode, I'm joined by Chris Chaney. Chris is an incredibly accomplished and diversified guy. He currently runs Chaney Holdings, which is a combination of sports marketing and financing for sports-related companies and teams. It all started when he graduated college. He dreamed of working in the NBA, but when he got there, he didn't feel like it was the right fit, and he quickly left to start his own sports marketing agency. He's continued pursuing his interests, working with all kinds of athletes, from basketball players to competitive video gamers, and followed his interests out into seemingly unrelated fields like startup investing and dinner experiences, which we start the episode by discussing. So if you feel like you have ever had a hard time picking one thing and sticking to it like I do, Chris is a perfect example of someone who is taking that diverse set of interests and built it into a company and a lifestyle that's successful and exciting for him. We had a lot of fun in this conversation, so without further ado, please welcome Chris to the show. Hey, Chris.
Hey, man. How are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Not too bad. Another week and another hot day in Texas.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's cooled down a little bit in New York, but definitely not envying the Texas weather. I lived in Austin about a year ago, so I know the summers get a little brutal down there.
Yes, you know. Yes, you know. It's okay. I guess we're surviving. AC helps you survive, I suppose.
Yeah, AC and being by the water.
Yeah, or that. Fortunately, it hasn't been incredibly humid. I guess it gets a little more humid the further south you go, but right now it's been fine. So I'm not complaining. It could be the complete opposite, right? You could live in like Siberia or somewhere and you never see any summer.
Exactly.
I am so glad that we were able to connect, Nat. Tell me, how do you know our mutual friend, Neil Soni?
Yeah, Neil and I went through the same startup incubator in Pittsburgh, but we went through it at different times and we sort of connected through the alumni network afterwards. It also turned out that we went to Carnegie Mellon at the same time for a couple of years, but had never crossed paths there. So we really just sort of connected through those alumni networks after graduating. And we've been pretty close, especially in the last year and a half. I asked Neil after he and I did our episode who I should talk to that he knew that would have like a really interesting and a story along the lines of doing something less conventional and very interesting since college. And you were probably the first person that he mentioned. So I was excited to get on and hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how interesting the story necessarily is. I suppose it's different. I feel like I'm not just walking off the beaten path, but I'm chopping my way through the woods and trying to put one step in front of the other. But I've enjoyed this whole entrepreneurial journey. It's been really all about the journey because the destination sometimes it feels like it eludes me, but the journey has been great. And I mean, being able to build great relationships with folks like Neil and many others, it's been the best part, actually, the people, and I remember I was working on a venture for a while. I think it was like a year and a half. It was an entirely new industry. And I built this network of relationships in that particular industry that I had no experience in. But after a year and a half, I was an expert. It felt like it, at least. Yeah, like I was an expert in this industry that I had known nothing about, 18 months prior. Ultimately, the venture didn't go anywhere, but what was amazing to me was how ultimately easy it was to build relationships with people in an entirely, for me, an entirely new industry and really starting from scratch and how open people were to networking and sharing their knowledge and what what they're doing, even signing on to be advisors to this company that I was working on, business partners, actually, not just advisors, but business partners. That was great. And now I'm not working in this industry anymore, at least for the time being. But that was, to me, such a unique experience to say, okay, I've discovered this industry that sounds really interesting. I know absolutely nothing about it, but I'm going to 100% immerse myself. And 18 months in, I was an expert. I was an expert. It came so naturally too. And it was all based on conversations with people. It was all based on conversations and doing research and then just, a good sense of intellectual curiosity as well as obviously an entrepreneurial mindset. I put together a team, a business plan and strategy, and we were on the fundraising path talking about raising $25 million for an entirely new venture from the ground up. I was in meetings with family offices and it was great. And my team was comprised of some of the most successful people in that particular industry.
What was the industry? I'm curious now.
Yeah, it's called dinner attractions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Medieval times. You may have been to medieval times.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's the dinner attraction or dinner attraction company. It's essentially what it is. It's a combination of 3 different industries, maybe even 4, depending how you look at it. It's a live entertainment venue similar to going to Nokia Theater, LA Live, or the theater at Madison Square Garden. So it's an entertainment venue where you can watch a live show. But it's also a restaurant. Because you are going there not just to watch the show, but to actually eat dinner. That's where the name dinner attraction comes from. But third, it's also an attraction. It's like a theme park. From the outside, in the case of medieval times, it looks like a castle. You feel like you're walking towards and into a castle. The theming happens to only be in the front where you see it. On the sides, it's just a regular building. And in the back, from the front, it looks like a castle. And then inside, it looks like a castle. So it's an experience in itself. You feel like you're being transported into the Middle Ages. And then lastly, if you wanted to include that as a 4th type of business, it's also a bar. And that's a significant part of that business is, alcohol, simply put, alcohol sales. So it's a fascinating niche industry that combines 3 or 4 different types of businesses in one. And I went to a show, to a medieval times show in Dallas, where I'm based, and I was so intrigued by the show. Was great, but I was so intrigued by the fact that I had never come across this business before, and that it seemed, just from the outsider's eye, it seemed to be really successful. And I remember that night, it was a Saturday night, went into my office and just did research on medieval times, just research, because I was captivated. I found out, how many locations they have. It's not just one here in Dallas, it's locations across the country, how long they've been around. And ultimately, I went to LinkedIn and looked to find some of the management or former management that I could have a conversation with around the business. And ultimately found one of their top executives, reached out to him, and he said, let's have lunch next week. And had lunch with him. And I told him, I said, this looks like an incredible business. And he said, it is. And it totally flies under the radar for most people. And I said, I'd like to figure out a way to buy medieval times, not with my capital, but I know investors. And this business, if it holds true based on the observations and just the conversation that I had with this former executive over lunch, if what you're telling me is accurate, as well as my own, assumptions and perspective, this business is perfect for an acquisition. And he said, well, the company, the owners, they won't sell it. It's a family business. They won't sell it. But we could start a new company. And that's very simple statement literally started a 1.5 year long journey of launching and working on launching our own dinner attraction business. So it started by going to a show and then finding someone on LinkedIn and having lunch, and that person suggesting, I don't know how seriously he meant it. And I'm not sure if he knew that it would really be the beginning of me getting immersed in this space and us working on everything. We had financial projections incredibly. I mean, we developed a highly sophisticated financial model. We had drawings for the venue. We had an architect work on, what the venue would look like. We had graphic designer come up with show concepts of what the show would visually look like. We had a producer write up the show concept. We had a team of advisors that was absolutely stellar, and I think would make almost any company jealous, regardless of the industry. And we even had an investor group that was going to build the facility for us and acquire the underlying real estate. But the final piece that we were missing were investors that would essentially fund the startup operations and the initial run of the business. Yeah, and then, we were working away for a long time, but ultimately weren't able to get that part of it funded. We had everything else in place. I mean, we were even looking at sites in different markets. We had developed a market model that would basically tell us which markets across the country, meaning which metropolitan areas, would be the most attractive based on demographics and psychographics. I'd never heard of psychographics before.
What is psychographics then?
So demographics is basically who you are just from a data perspective, right? You are African American, you're Hispanic, you're male, you're female, this is your household income. I don't know, this is the language you speak at home, that sort of stuff. It's more like data points, if you will. Psychographics is about who you are as a person, meaning your likes and your dislikes. So your psychographic profile may be that you're in your 30s and 40s, you're college educated, you're white, you work in management law education, you're married, both earn a good living, you live in suburban America, you read Sports Illustrated and you watch ESPN, you vote Democratic, and you come up with something else. It goes down to describing individual groups of the population in extreme detail. There are 71 psychographic segments within the population. So you have larger groupings and then you have individual segments. And I mean, the descriptions are amazing. They talk about what kind of TV channels people watch, what kind of food they eat, what's their digital behavior, whether or not they invest in stocks. I mean, it's amazing. And of course, it's not 100% accurate, but you can essentially break down the entire American population into these 71 groups, and pretty much everyone fits into one group.
Where does the data come from? Is it self-reported?
So Mosaic USA, I think it's a division or a part of Experian. And Experian is that credit bureau, I think, or one of the companies that reports your credit, or that you get your credit score from. But they also have a company that's Experian Marketing Services, and they have access to that kind of data. I mean, they also own an email marketing company. They own an internet monitoring company that collects information directly from ISPs. So, I mean, these guys, Experian, they know things about you. You probably don't want them to necessarily know about.
Well, that's how you sometimes get the scary, highly targeted ads, right? Where it seems like Instagram or Facebook knows what you need before even you do, right?
Yeah. And so actually, speaking of data, while working in this industry, there's some amazing stuff that you can do. You can do a license plate study, at least here in Texas. So what you do is, this is amazing actually. You could go to a Dallas Cowboys game or go to a Dallas Mavericks game, right? And you could drive around the parking lots and take photos of the license plates. It's not illegal. You can take photos of the license plates, and then you can you digitize them, and it gives you, I'm not sure if it gives you the exact address of that license plate, or it just gives you sort of like a blob on the map, where I think it might give you the zip code. I forget exactly what it gives you. It's called a license plate study. So what you can do with this license plate study, you can actually go to a competitor and figure out where all that competitor's customers are coming from. And then that can help you with targeting them if you want them to come to you. So you could drive around a competitor's parking lot, right? Take photos of the license plates, know what zip codes these people are coming from, or maybe even exact addresses. And then you can target in those areas if you assume that they are also the right customer for your business. That's the kind of stuff that you can do.
You could even do retargeting for your own business, right? Where you just have cameras in your parking lot and then you're sending out mail based on who's coming in.
Exactly. And then also there are data sets that also then help you understand where do people work versus where do they live. And then you can target them on their way to work, because then you can figure out the route.
Buy the right billboards.
Exactly. This is nothing is left to chance. If you don't want it to, sure, you could just randomly take out ads and, throw up a billboard that you like. But if you want to, and if you invest the money into those kinds of resources, you don't have to leave anything up to chance.
So you're not working on the dinner attractions anymore. So when you're at cocktail party or whatever, how do you introduce yourself and what you're working on?
That's a good one. So it depends, right? Right now I talk about eSports. I was just at a soccer match over the weekend. I got invited. USA was playing Costa Rica. USA won. I'm a big soccer fan, and it was at Cowboy Stadium. And so there are some folks that work for the Cowboys there and asked, well, what do you do? I said, I work in eSports. So right now, because my focus has been in eSports, I'm an advisor to a number of eSports startups, more than a handful, which has been great, lots of early stage startups. But I've also been working on my own venture in eSports. And that's why this week is so crazy, to secure some significant funding for this venture. Esports right now is a really, really hot industry that a lot of people are talking about across industries, not just sports and entertainment, but also beyond, because it may have such a massive impact on just, on us as a society, if you will, over the next 5 to 10 years. It's affecting, or it's in line with changing viewing habits and perhaps even a decline in traditional sports participation and viewership. It's about how can you capture for brands, how can you capture this kind of demographic that probably before was not really addressable. And now you have them in this esports world, and people are getting pulled in from traditional sports into this esports world.
And sorry, can you explain esports really quickly, just in case anyone listening doesn't know what it is?
Sure. Well, esports, very simply put, is competitive video gaming at a professional level. That's the simplest explanation. It's professional video gaming. Has been around for some time. It's not new in the sense that it just emerged in the last couple of years. It's been around for a number of years, also outside of the US. But in recent years, particularly in the last maybe 3 years or so, it's become mainstream, and it's gotten a lot of mainstream interest, both in terms of media companies buying into it. Disney, for example, just announced that they would have some esports type shows, I believe on Disney XD, 2 new shows. ESPN broadcasts esports, TBS broadcasts esports. Then you have a lot of investors that are buying into it, tech investors, tech entrepreneurs, sports team owners, former athletes, the likes of Shaquille O'Neal and Alex Rodriguez that have bought into it, and then people that come that are just investors, just generally investors that have an appetite for the space. So that's esports. It's growing rapidly in North America. It's driven very much through the digital landscape. You have platforms such as Twitch. So it's a live streaming platform that has been very much at the forefront of many of the esports conversations. You and I, we can create our own channel and stream us playing video games if we want to, or we can watch someone else play video games. And we can watch tournaments on this platform as well. Just yesterday, there was a tournament in Europe, and I think when I tuned in yesterday afternoon, it had, at that moment, for this one single tournament, which was held in Poland, for one single game called Counter-Strike, there were over 500,000 people that were watching in that moment when I tuned in. And this is one event, one particular game at one given time, over 500,000 people watching live.
Is Counter-Strike the main game that you follow? As I should mention, I actually went to the International for Dota 2 a few years ago.
That's great. How did you go to TI?
Oh, I played an embarrassing amount of Dota through my first couple years of college. It came out, I got into the beta my freshman year because I had a friend who was sort of connected with IceFrog, and so he got some really early beta passes, and so we were playing a lot of it. But yeah, a few friends and I went to Seattle for, I think it was TI4. It was a lot of fun. So I mean, I love this space. It's really cool that you're involved in it. So yeah, is Counter-Strike the main game that you're looking at, or?
No, and I'll give you I'll add more color to it. The biggest game in the world is League of Legends in esports. The biggest game is League of Legends. Has a massive following in China. You know, I don't think Riot actually publishes any statistics, but I believe I've heard some people mention that 70% of the League of Legends players and viewership may be in China alone, globally. So it makes up a massive part of the audience, the League of Legends audience. But in terms of absolute size, regardless of where that may be geographically concentrated, League of Legends is the biggest game. So League is number one. And then after that, you know, you're really looking at CSGO being a number two game. Then you have Dota 2. Dota 2 is up there as well. And then Hearthstone, which is a digital card game. Those are games, those four are the games that you would consider, depending on what metric you apply, you would consider them tier one games. They're the highest tier in esports. Hearthstone is generally played one-on-one, and then the other games, Dota, League of Legends, Dota 2, League of Legends, and CSGO. Those are team-based games with multiple players. And then you have a tier 2, which is Call of Duty, Overwatch, Halo, Smite, Heroes of the Storm, a bunch of other games. And then you even have a tier 3, which are some of the smaller but still relatively popular games, Super Smash Bros., Vainglory, Rocket League. Rocket League has been doing very well. But, you know, the landscape contains a number of games, many different games that call themselves eSports. But certainly at the very top, you have a handful of really popular games. And League of Legends would be the biggest. And I put CSGO after that. And then, you know, Dota, Hearthstone. Call of Duty is a game that I personally like a lot. Since you asked which game that I follow, I like Call of Duty a lot. I think it's a really, really fun game. But I play Hearthstone. That's the game I play. And it's a great digital card game. I mean, to me, it's a lot of fun. Blizzard did a great job. They're the publisher. They did a great job with that game.
And you said you're getting financially involved in esports, right?
Yes, we're getting What's been happening a lot, as I mentioned before, with all the investment flowing into the space, it's significant what's happening right now. I'm also looking to get traditional sports team owners involved in esports. That's been a trend in this industry that traditional sports team owners are investing in esports, both the teams themselves as well as the owners of those teams. It's been both. And that's what I'm working on as well at the moment. And our group will hopefully have 3 ownership groups, separate groups that each own 1 or 2 different sports teams. And so we're bringing 3 groups together that are all, very, very well established and that own teams in Major League Soccer and Major League Baseball and the National Football League. So they're pro sports team owners.
And you've been involved in the sports space from kind of the business side for a long time, ever since college, right? Since you were at Princeton?
Correct.
Yeah, because Neil mentioned that you had some conference for students at Princeton interested in getting into sports. Is that right?
I did. It was called the Princeton Sports Symposium when it started, and we ultimately rebranded it in year 5 to the Ivy Sports Symposium and started rotating among Ivy League schools. It was always inclusive. It was never an exclusive type of Ivy, prestige thing. Anyone could attend. But we started rotating because we felt it would give the event more exposure for the event and the students across the Northeast a better opportunity to attend. So we did the event in Philadelphia. We went to New York. We went to Boston. So we've been between Philadelphia and Boston. We've been across that part of the Northeast. And we did the event 9 times in the US and once in the UK. We created something called the Global Sports Symposium, held it in London in partnership with Arsenal Football Club at the Emirates Stadium. And that was great because it served a similar purpose. And the purpose across the board had been from the very beginning to expose students and young professionals to some of the leaders in the sports industry, to show them the diversity of the industry as far as the types of opportunities in the space. The mission has always been to expose students to the many facets of the sports industry, whether it's marketing and sponsorships or facilities and law and athlete representation and marketing to team ownership and startups and entrepreneurship. I mean, there's so many aspects that make up sports and entertainment, and that's something that's been important to us. So it's been for 10 years that we did it, was that dual approach, expose students to some of the top executives in the industry and hopefully enable them to establish some relationships, do some networking, and that could lead to internships, that could lead to even full-time opportunities. And then on the other side, also show them just how many facets there are in the sports industry. And sometimes these facets don't get enough attention from a business perspective. So that's what we did and had a really good run. I mean, we had hundreds of, at our peak, we had about 500 attendees in one year and more than 100 speakers on top of that. So an event of about 600 people, still compact enough to where you don't feel like you're lost in a crowd of 2,000 or so people, but big enough where there were ample networking opportunities and you had a chance to see a lot of different types of speakers and executives.
And how did you first get involved in the sports world? Because I imagine you didn't immediately start running these events, right? So what was your initial jumping in point?
It actually started in high school. For some reason, had the idea to organize a basketball tournament, a high school basketball tournament, and did it twice, I think. Yeah, twice, maybe 3 times, twice. And I'd done that in high school. And then when I came to college, I got involved in a student group, and the student group was looking to do some kind of charity event or some kind of event to raise money for charity. And I suggested, let's do a basketball tournament. And the chair of the organization said, well, if you want to do a basketball tournament, It's all yours. Go do a basketball tournament. And I said, well, I'm going to do a basketball tournament. And I ultimately ran this event 4 years in college. And how I got into the business of sports was I figured if I'm running a basketball tournament, I need sponsors. And I'd done the same thing back home in high school. So I went through our alumni database and looked for people that worked in sports. And of course, I'm using search terms like Adidas, New York Knicks. Obviously, I don't know anything about the sports business, but I know Adidas is a brand. And of course, I'm looking for someone that works at Adidas. I came across someone that works at Motorola. I was looking for sponsors and big brands. That's all I'd really known. And I got in touch with someone that was actually a very senior executive at the New York Knicks. And he was great. I mean, he sent, we basically had a partnership with the New York Knicks for our small on-campus basketball tournament. And that ultimately led to spending a summer doing some work with their community and field marketing team, the New York Knicks community and field marketing team, that is, establishing a good relationship with someone at Adidas. And also ultimately it gave me the appetite to do more networking. I was so pleasantly surprised by the receptiveness of the people I'd reached out to that I decided I should do more of this, not just for the tournament where I'm quote unquote selling them to sponsor us, but just to get to know people, to understand what do they do in this business of sports. And so that led me to establishing some great relationships. Then I ran the event for 4 years. I fell into working as a student manager for the men's basketball team. That was truly coincidence. A friend approached me and said very nonchalantly, "Do you want to be the manager of the basketball team?" And I said, don't know what that job is, but yes. If it has to do with basketball, I mean, you can tell basketball is just one of my passions. I'll do it. And I ended up being the student manager for 3 years. And that gave me another perspective on sports behind the scenes, in this case, off the court. And ultimately, one day I sat in the office of someone in the athletics department. I was looking for his support for the basketball tournament, which we did on campus for 4 years. And I wanted the athletics department to help us in some way. And I sat in his office and he said, "Have you heard about this? My alma mater has a sports business conference. Are you familiar with it?" And I said, "No, what is it about?" And he showed me on his computer, he showed me the agenda for a sports business conference. And in that moment, I said, "I'm doing a sports business conference at Princeton." In that moment, I saw the agenda and I thought, it's just a light bulb went on. And I said, "I'm doing a sports business conference here." And 10 months later, we had the first sports symposium.
Oh, too cool. So did you keep working on those kind of symposiums right when you graduated, or was there some?
I did, yeah. I ran it as a nonprofit. It was a nonprofit organization, which was also important to me because it was all about empowerment, right, of students and young professionals. It really wasn't meant to make money or be some sort of major revenue generator for me personally or for anyone else, and for that matter. It was meant to be self-sustaining, which is hard as a nonprofit. I came to realize that over the next few years. But we wanted to keep it affordable for students. That was really important to us. And we wanted to make sure that we created a vehicle that we're really proud of. So I got some other people involved that became passionate about this company, this platform. But I did continue running it after in different roles, not always as the person in charge, but I continued to run and be closely involved until we finally decided after our 10th event that, it was probably time for some change and we needed more funding. I mean, that was hard. I invested a lot of my own money into the organization, and we were a 501c3, but it's just so hard at least in my experience, it was so hard running this as a nonprofit. And it ultimately, I think it had just run its course at that point. But 10 years is great. I mean, there are a few things I feel that you can look back on. You can say, I've actually done this for 10 years, right? So with that, I'm happy with what we've accomplished. It's important I say we, not I. It's important what we accomplished over those 10 years. I'm proud of that. And if we bring it back at some point and in some shape or form, that's great. But we can look back and we can say, wow, we had an impact. People still ask me about it, and people that I speak with that have gone in the past, they still think fondly about the event. And so I'm happy with everything.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that you were putting a lot of your own money into it. Where was that money coming from?
Right out of college, I took a job with the NBA to continue the theme of basketball. Quickly felt that the corporate environment just wasn't what I was looking for at the time. I had been so entrepreneurial, starting a basketball tournament, starting a sports business conference. I mean, those are small projects, but I was really the one driving them and ultimately responsible for their success and their failure. And I missed that at the NBA. I missed that kind of responsibility and the opportunity to actually build something. And so I left to start my own sports marketing agency and continue to run the symposium. So I was taking revenues that I was generating through the agency and put them into the symposium. Yeah, it was such a passion of mine, right? It wasn't a tough decision for me. It was supposed to be doing. I'm not getting any cash in return, but it's what I'm passionate about. And so I invested a good bit of capital into the organization, and we were able to bring on an executive director, sort of full part-time. It worked out. And, one year we were actually relatively profitable, and we're able to pay a small stipend to our executive director but it was, or even pay me a stipend one year when I was executive director. But it's, we're talking about just enough money to maybe pay for your gas or so every month, right? I mean, it's nothing significant, but I enjoyed that run. And the agency, I started in 2008. So that's been about 9.5 years. And that was the revenue generator. And then the symposium was the passion. Well, the agency was passion too, but the symposium allowed me to give back and empower others.
When you started the agency, how did you get those first clients, and who were you doing the marketing for?
Great question. Obviously, 2008 wasn't a great time to start anything.
Yeah.
So I'll preface it with that. Initially,
or it was a great opportunity, scoop up everything that's on the table from everyone going under, right?
Or that. Unfortunately, in this industry, you've had people that would leave their jobs to try and do exactly what I'm doing because, they were laid off and, they had to look for something else. And some of those people, of course, have 10, 15, 20 years of experience or more. And I just graduated college 9 months ago. So that made it a little bit difficult. But the networking certainly helped, and working on some small projects here and there, making an introduction here or there that led to something. It was pretty slow initially. So that took up a lot of time, but had some small projects in soccer, minor league basketball, something on the digital technology side, just enough to keep going. It certainly wasn't glamorous or anything. It was just, me going out there on my own and figuring it out with relatively little experience, maybe a bit foolish in hindsight, but filled with an incredible amount of passion and incredible amount of, I would say, hard work and dedication. Ultimately, what happened was I came across the world of sports startups, sports tech startups. through a friend that I was working with on the symposium, and he introduced me to a tech startup that had lots and lots of venture funding, and they were interested in building out a business in the sports industry. They wanted to get into sports. So a tech startup, a tech startups on the video technology side, and they wanted to get into sports. They'd worked with one or two clients in sports, but they really wanted to make it a push. So they brought me on board to do business development for them and help them open doors and bring on new clients in the sports vertical. And that really whetted my appetite to work with more tech startups, some sport tech startups specifically, on business development and strategic partnerships. So that's one thing that I ended up doing quite a bit. And then from there, I mean, it's not a hard stretch to then go actually to advise some of those startups, right? And be an advisor more than just a consultant. So I ended up doing, or have been doing, a lot of that. And then on the other side, through another colleague, I got introduced to non-traditional sports. Action sports, lacrosse, rugby, mixed martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, obstacle course racing, CrossFit, a lot of these niche sports and industries that have emerged over the last few years and have seen some explosive growth. And I got connected because she was looking to invest in unique sports startups and basically asked me if I knew any, but more not your tech type companies, but more brands like a CrossFit or Under Armour,
or Spartan Race, or
exactly. And so I started looking into my network and started doing work in non-traditional sports. Spent a little time with the good folks at Spartan Race, since you mentioned them. Worked with the leading mixed martial arts brand, performance apparel brand. Worked with a huge action sports company called Nitro Circus, and did few other things, and rugby, created actually a rugby business forum, US-based business forum, and launched a rugby marketing agency. I worked with a 3D printed mouthguard brand, also a bit non-traditional. So I got into this world of non-traditional sports and entertainment and made it, a niche or a focus. And then from there, got into eSports, because eSports is also non-traditional. It's right. You can make that connection between non-traditional sports and then going to eSports, because eSports is just that. It's non-traditional.
And it seems like there's a big element of funding and investing here with a lot of these interests. So when did that come into the picture? Because on the surface, that seems like a bit of a jump, right? From doing the sports marketing to being almost like a venture group or a capital fund.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that also came I think the interest first started when I was speaking with a friend that was looking to invest and call it the next Under Armour. It was literally, that's how she actually positioned it to me. We're looking for the next Under Armour. And this was not a coincidence. Her firm had actually invested in Under Armour as one of the first investors in Under Armour. So just to provide that reference, yeah, they did very, very well. No surprise. And we got connected, and she was looking for the next Under Armour. And when she said that, one, I really didn't know much about investing in the space of venture capital or private equity. But when she talked about what her company did and that they were looking for the next Under Armour, I was just so fascinated. I was fascinated by the world of investing. And I thought, well, let me understand the space as well. And that's how I ended up working with some of my clients on their own fundraising, because I realized that I already had a significant network to investors or relationships with investors that were looking to invest in sports and entertainment. I kind of didn't realize I did, but I thought about it and looked into it. And, there I was connected to a lot of sports related investors. So she sparked that both looking into non-traditional sports more closely, as well as gaining an appetite for this world of private equity, venture capital investments, specifically around sports. And then, again, work with some of my clients on their fundraising efforts. And then kind of similar to when you work in non-traditional sports, you inevitably, I think, come across eSports, inevitably from working with some of my clients or partners. I much rather refer to them as on their fundraising. I thought, well, maybe I can invest myself, right? Or maybe I can raise capital for my own ventures, which is, oh man, that is incredibly hard. I've not raising money for others is really, really hard. Raising money for your own ventures is super, super, super hard, probably even more frustrating because it's for you. And so you take things maybe even more to heart at times. But I was fortunate enough to be able to run a decent enough business so that I could invest in some companies and get exposure as a very, 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 very modest angel investor. So I'm a baby angel investor. And that's been interesting as well. That's a very different world, investing in startups and working with entrepreneurs at the earliest stages.
When you're getting interested in something like that, whether it's the investing or the dinner parties you discussed earlier, it seems like you're really good at talking to people and immersing yourself in the space and figuring it out. So what does your process for that look like? Because I think it's something that a lot of people might think would be a lot harder to do past a certain point, but it seems like you've had no issue changing around and trying out new fields as you go.
I've thought about this. I think everyone should think about what are they really good at? What are they great at even? And then, of course, also the weaknesses, right? What am I not good at? What are my weaknesses? I would say two of my greatest strengths are my ability to immerse myself, to your point, in entirely new fields, or even fields that maybe I've heard about before, have some familiarity with, but becoming very well versed in that particular space. That's one of my strengths that I just know about myself because I think about these things. The other strength would be my ability to build relationships, both in an industry that I'm already in, as well as an industry that I'm getting into. And the combination of those two things, I feel, have really significantly helped me as I'm getting immersed in, let's say, eSports or even Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for some time, or mixed martial arts, which is still a passion. I'm a big MMA fan, or the world of dinner attractions. The process is pretty simple. It starts with people. I go to LinkedIn or people in my network that I know that might be doing something and just ask, hey, I'm wanting to learn more about eSports. I'm wanting to learn more about dinner attractions. I'm really fascinated. And it comes from a genuine place, right? I'm really fascinated about this industry. I'd love for you to tell me a bit more about it. And then I ask a bunch of questions. And then I might say, hey, is there anyone else that you know that maybe I should have a conversation with? I'm learning about this space. And then that person might say, you know what? You should really speak with Nat. You should really speak with Neil. And I have conversations with Nat and with Neil. And then I ask Nat and Neil, who do you think I should speak with? And so before I know, I probably in eSports, I've probably had over the last, a year or something like that, probably had calls with close to 100 different people. Yeah. Phone calls, meetings.
What's your pitch when you reach out to them? Just, hey, I'm really interested and I'd love to talk about this?
Essentially, it sounds silly, but yes, that is because I'm not selling them on anything. I'm not even selling them on me. I'm telling them very genuinely that I'm interested in your industry. It looks fascinating from the outside, and this is what I've done so far. And I see I seem to see some similarities, or seem to, there just seems to be so much opportunity in this space. Tell me more. And in my experience, people love, and I'm not saying people love talking about themselves. I'm not saying that. But if you have a passion for a specific industry or for your work, you're happy to talk about it. Unless it's super confidential or secret or something like that, right? Then sure, you can't talk about it. If you work for the NSA, you probably shouldn't talk about it. But if you work in esports or if you work in dinner attractions, those are two just recent and great examples for me. It's absolutely amazing how open people are to have a conversation with an outsider that is just genuinely interested in learning about their industry. And that's been great.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you always been comfortable reaching out like that? Because, I mean, it sounds very natural and very friendly, but I think it's still intimidating to a lot of people. So did that come naturally to you, or was it something you practiced?
Great question. I'd say generally, it has become natural. I don't think it was initially. I mean, it first started when I was looking for sponsors. It was very purpose driven, right? I need sponsors. Here's a database. I need sponsors. It was a very simple equation. And I reached out and I didn't think much of it. Probably if I had thought about, I'm reaching out to the president or the CEO of the New York Knicks, asking him to sponsor my rinky-dink basketball tournament. What is he going to, he has probably other stuff to worry about, but it never crossed my mind. I didn't even think about it until probably years later did I think, well, wow, I just reached out, I guess. So part of it was maybe a level of innocence, but also just having no fear. Again, whether that's conscious or subconscious, but just not having any fear. I'm reaching out. All that can happen is for someone to say no. I'm being very professional, very respectful. Sometimes, of course, maybe a little bit, making sure I follow up and being very persistent. But I'm very professional and I'm very friendly in doing that because, hey, I'm asking something from you, whether it's time, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's an introduction, whatever it might be. You should be nice. And so when I started getting some good responses, I just kept doing it, just kept replicating it, probably refining my approach. And now when people reach out to me, it's great. It feels so good to have someone reach out to you. And if I can lend 15 minutes of my time, and even if it's an hour of my time in some cases, I'm really happy to do that. But I think it developed. I feel like you have to just, this idea of going out and just trying to swim, not overthinking it, just going out there into the unknown and just trying it out. And then it doesn't work, and then you refine it, and then maybe it works a little better or not, and then you keep refining it and refining it until it actually ultimately works. And that's been my approach. And today it's the most natural thing to me. I mean, in college, I wrote David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA. I wrote him a letter basically asking to get on the phone with him because I wanted to learn about the NBA. I mean, I reached out to the commissioner of the NBA like he's, I mean, it was, again, very, very professional, but he's the commissioner of one of the biggest sports leagues in the world. Why would he bother even responding to my email? Who knows if he even gets mail? Because I looked online for the address of the NBA's corporate offices as a college kid, and then just mailed it to David Stern, National Basketball Association. That is literally what I did. I kid you not. That is what I did. I typed up a letter on my computer. I printed it out. I signed it, put it in an envelope, and sent it to David Stern in 645 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York. David Stern. It's like sending a letter to Kobe Bryant or something, right? I mean, do those things really arrive? Well, it did. And a week later, his assistant reached out to me confirming that the letter had been received and saying that David unfortunately didn't have any time to speak with me, but he would be happy for me to have a conversation with essentially the third highest ranking executive at the NBA.
Oh, that's so cool. So he actually read it.
Well, I don't know if he read it or his assistant discussed it with him, and he probably did read it. And it was amazing. I mean, and then 2 weeks later, I was speaking with the third highest executive at the NBA. I mean, based on the letter. So part of it is just, I think, just not having any fear. If you're respectful, if you're professional, all that someone can say is no or not respond. If they respond negatively, if they, then they're jerks because that's not warranted. Then you're a jerk. If someone approaches you in a professional and a nice manner, asks for your time, you can say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have any time. That's totally cool. Or you don't respond. I mean, people are generally more responsive than they are. Sometimes you have to be a bit persistent, but it's important not to be afraid to get turned down or, get rejected.
And I think too, like just not having an ego about reaching out, because some people might think, oh, I don't need to put a lot of effort into the networking, cold outreach. Even somebody in your situation, right? You were already doing all of this stuff, like really doing well, it seems, but still making the effort to reach out and build those connections, which is, I think, part of what's so cool about it. And now it's become a big habit and part of your life.
It really has, and I've enjoyed it too. It's just been great. I get to know a lot of people, and sometimes it's one conversation and that's that. But sometimes one conversation can lead to many conversations and even a business partnership.
Yeah. And speaking of the business partnerships, that's another thing that seems really consistent in your story, where it sounds like you've almost always been working on your own things, your own projects, businesses, and like you said, didn't do very well in the corporate environment. Was that just something you always knew you wanted to do, was work on your own businesses, or was it something that you fell into and discovered? How did that develop?
I would definitely say the latter. I thought I was destined to work at the NBA. I just thought that that's where I was supposed to be until my first day in the office. When I realized that day, I realized that's not where I'm supposed to be. That was a really tough realization because I was really working hard to get that job. And ultimately, it wasn't where I was meant to be. And that's the only way that I can describe it. And then coming to that realization, like I said, that was hard. But what it also told me was maybe who I am is an entrepreneur. And perhaps the only way to find out is to go out and do it. My thought process wasn't, I certainly don't think that it was a very nuanced thought process where I had every step of the way just mapped out, It was just, how does it feel? Does it feel right? Is it where I want to be? Does it seem this is not the place where I want to be? And then what do I do instead? So it's been just kind of driven by what seems right for me. And that's been the whole process. It's not feeling in the sense of I'm happy or I'm lucky or any of those things, but what does it mean to me? How do I think about it? Did it mean anything to me working at the NBA? Well, after the second day, I didn't anymore, right? It just didn't mean anything anymore. Yeah, it just didn't. And did it seem like it was the right place? No, it didn't seem like it was the right place. And then I'm going to my job, and kind of at this point, I think you're going through the motions already. Unfortunately, it's really unfortunate, but you quickly adapt. And for me, adapting was finding something that I was really passionate about, and then, to use that term from earlier, immersing myself. And sometimes what I feel is important perhaps too is that you don't consider yourself a quitter, right? That's really strong to feel that way. And you quit if something gets too hard. that's quitting. To realize that it's not the right fit for you and make that a conscious decision and think about what else is better and stronger and where you can succeed as an individual, that's adapting, right? That's making a choice. That's moving forward. Quitting is because you like what you're doing, or you still like it, but you think it's too hard and you just leave, right? That's quitting. And I think we have to remind ourselves also that if something doesn't fit, doesn't feel right, is ultimately not what we want to do or want it to be, it's okay to say, I'm going to leave or I'm going to do something else. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You treat the people right, and you let them know, and hey, this is not for me and it's not working out, and you support them, and what if there's a transition required or whatever the case might be. But you can't be afraid to say, okay, this isn't right. This isn't for me.
I love that distinction, because I think a lot of people, especially if they've put in 4 years of college or a number of years of their career working towards a specific thing, and then they get it and they're not fully fulfilled by it, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that comes with that, right? Where you'll say, oh no, like I have to stick with it, or oh, I put so much work into getting here, now I have to go with it. It can be hard and scary to adapt, right? To use your language. And especially from your story, it seems like you were working towards the MBA for so long that can't have been an easy realization. Do you remember if there was anything specific that tipped you off to it not feeling right? Or was it just the whole general feeling of being there?
Yeah, I shouldn't point at anyone, and I'm not. Just it didn't feel like maybe sounds almost dramatic, but I didn't feel wanted. To be completely honest, I didn't feel wanted. I didn't feel like it was a place that that wanted me, not just another time card, right? Not just another email address or a paper pusher, that wanted me as the individual. And I didn't conform to that. I realized that very quickly, that I didn't conform to maybe that person that they wanted. And I literally felt that way on my very first day. Maybe I should have known, because until then, I'd never done a corporate internship. I mean, I had worked for a small startup. I mentioned with the New York Knicks, that was actually in a specific department. We were never in the office. We were traveling across New York City, all boroughs, doing stuff in the community, actually organizing a basketball tournament in the communities. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed, at that time, I really enjoyed the event space. I worked at a basketball magazine, a lifestyle magazine. It was a team of maybe 6 or 8 people in a small office in New York. And I think I was the only intern at the time. I mean, it was startup, and it was great. That was a cool company, cool bunch of guys. And it was basketball and it was business, and I really enjoyed that. It was called Dime Magazine. So I'd done that. I'd worked with our men's basketball team over the summer, doing some summer camp stuff. And then I did some work for a couple of days actually for the NBA, but it was also out in the field, if you will, around the NBA draft, helping with that. Also not in the office. So my only office experience until that time was essentially with a startup, or at least with a very small company that had a dynamic environment where people were wearing shorts and sneakers to work and t-shirt. At the NBA, I was wearing a button down and, belt and slacks and dress shoes and
Once you've tasted some of that startup culture and energy, it's very hard to go back.
Oh, it's brutal. And you know what? I don't know if the culture, if there's, the very buttoned up, I don't know. I think sometimes maybe people feel that if they have a certain, maybe a certain way of dressing translates to a certain way of doing business. But I'm not sure if I prescribe to that. I think you can wear flip-flops and t-shirt and, cut off shorts and you can do great business. I'm not sure if that defines you. Maybe if you let it define you, then maybe. But I've met, this is cool. I've met with a private equity firm I know, and I have to chuckle because you would think those are the most button-up guys, right? Met with this private equity firm. And they invest in many different industries and met with one of their guys. And I come into the office and he's wearing Jordans. And I just got such a kick out of him wearing Jordans. I thought, here's a guy, MBA, right, working for a very successful private equity firm, and he's wearing Jordans in the office. And I came in with slacks, and I think I was wearing dress pants. Yeah, well, obviously I was wearing dress pants. And I think I might have been wearing like nice boots or something like that. But he was wearing Jordans, and I thought that is the kind of culture that you can be a $600 million private equity fund, but you can build a culture that's about working hard and not about being. You can let people be who they are, right? And if someone wants to wear Jordans to this office and some jeans and a t-shirt, let them wear Jordans, jeans, and a t-shirt to the office. If they crush it, what's wrong with that? And so I immediately gained a huge appreciation for the company, for this private equity firm, because I thought this probably has to do with culture. Right? This probably comes down to culture. And I thought this is a culture that I can buy into it just based on that one single observation. At least for me, that's how I felt.
Well, it's kind of a sign that they care about the things that really matter, not the superfluous little other things, right? It's like, that when you get feedback there, it's probably going to be relevant, valuable feedback. It's not going to be over some minutia that doesn't really matter for the most important variables there.
I believe that as well. Yes, agreed.
If you had to do something completely outside of the sports world, what do you think it would be? Is there any interest that you've wanted to pursue some sort of business in that you've never been able to?
If it was completely outside of the sports industry, there are a few things actually that I find pretty interesting. Oil and gas actually is something, the energy sector, I find that pretty interesting. It's just something living in Dallas or in Texas that before moving here, I didn't really know anything about, and I still don't. But that's an industry that I could see myself in, and it's an industry in flux too, which I like. I think it's going to experience a lot of changes. Oil and gas, and then related to that, energy. The space that is where I would have just no place to be, but that I would find incredibly fascinating is advanced military technology.
Ooh, I bet that would be an extremely interesting field to work in, just to be a fly on the wall for a lot of those conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've some of the videos, Boston Robotics, they do some crazy stuff. So that is not because I'm all about military and war. I mean, my father was in the army, so, there's that. But it's more about the fascination of the technology and how leading edge some of the stuff is. What DARPA is working on, it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, I was reading about this kind of, it's like a plane, experimental plane that could fly at, I don't even want to say what the speed was because I don't remember, but it was ridiculously fast. Or this humanoid robot that they were working on, I forget what it was called, but they're working on these humanoid robots. Boston Dynamics is a company that had worked on it and may still be working on it. Or this dog, the legged squat support dog or something like that.
Where they're pushing it over in the videos?
Exactly, yeah.
That thing is a little terrifying.
It is, yes, it is. It is absolutely terrifying, but it's just as much fascinating. I mean, to think about, anyways, just to think about the kind of stuff that they're working on. And I'm not sure if I don't think it's about waging war and world domination necessarily. I think the people that work for DARPA are just genuinely, they're technologists, right? They're researchers. They love coming up with new stuff. It happens to be used by the military, but in some cases, that's also where the budgets are. And so I just, that's something completely sort of out of the wheelhouse, advanced military or emerging military technologies. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, and especially because so much of it, and well, maybe not so much of it, but the influence on consumer technology down the line is so significant, right? You've got like the internet and lasers and everything that came out of the space program and all of that. It'd be very cool to be at what may be the front lines of some major consumer trend 10 years out, to get to see that develop, starting with your involvement in it as a military experiment.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of this stuff makes it into civilian use. And yeah, it's interesting.
You know, this is a total kind of non sequitur, but if you were going to give one book to the incoming freshmen or outgoing seniors at Princeton, what do you think it would be?
Well, a book that I read recently and I really like is Ready Player One.
Did you see the movie trailer?
I did, yes. That's a great book that I read. Yeah, it was recommended to me, and I picked it up, and it was sitting, and I figured, let me just read it, and then I completely devoured it. So that's a book that I recently have read. You know, other than that, I'm terrible when it comes to reading books. I read a lot of articles. I read a bit of articles. I sort of have my daily scoop of news and then various articles that I read, some sports business specific, some more around science, technology, all sorts of things. So I should be a better reader. Anything that you've read recently that you really like, you recommend?
Well, on the kind of technology topic that we've been talking about, I'm finishing up The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. It's pretty good. He's talking about how it's very fashionable to be pessimistic about the future of humanity with, you know, climate change and AI and everything. But then he breaks down over the whole history of humankind, you know, what has happened through technological advances and how it's, you know, very consistently been for the advancement of the species, and things have gotten better. And there have been doomsayers and naysayers all along the way. And he did a really good job of, I think, making at least me feel a little more optimistic about technology in the future, and that we'll be able to figure it out and things will be okay. So
that's great. I'll make a note of that to check it out. Yeah, unfortunately, I should be much better when it comes to reading books. I get so consumed by work, and then I pick up on the news specific to my industry, more articles that come out, and then just generally sort of the news overall. Make sure I have a good handle of what's going on in the world here, and particularly in Europe. I mean, I'm from Germany originally, so I always keep an eye on what's going on over in Germany. And before you know it, at least for me, it's that's as much as I get time for. But Ready Player One is just something that totally, within reading a couple of pages, I was absolutely hooked.
yeah, it's so easy to just read the whole thing in one sitting.
Exactly. And for whatever reason, it connects to what I'm doing now with eSports. That was not by design. It just sort of happens. I'm actually, I guess, kind of glad that I did read it and see how much overlap there is between that and what I'm working on in eSports.
Yeah, esports and VR, that'll be the next thing you have to look at.
Oh, yes. I'm a big believer in that. I don't know when. I guess it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Fully immersive games, and you also have fully immersive viewer experiences. You already have a little bit of that. The NBA was the first traditional sports league, from what I recall, to have a game that's fully in VR, fully in virtual reality. And I think you'll have a lot more of that with esports and having true VR esports competitions. There's some pretty interesting stuff that I think will come down the pipe. Even AR, I think, and that goes for traditional sports too, can significantly enhance the viewer experience, right? Because I don't know, you can look at a basketball game and maybe you're looking through it with your phone, or perhaps you're looking through it with your AR glasses, and you can see interesting statistics and news and data points, whatever. I mean, you could look at a player and say, wow, I've never seen this player before. And you look at the player, and then on the right side, that player's bio comes up and maybe his top plays of the season or something like that. I mean, I see AR also having an interesting impact on traditional sports.
Yeah, well, I think AR is going to end up being that next layer beyond the phone into some of our daily existence. VR is almost like its own thing where you have to go into a room and do it as like you're just in the VR, but AR has that cool potential to be brought out into the world with you. I was playing with the VR stuff a bit at the end of last year. I got the HTC Vive and was doing some programming with it. And it's like, it's not there yet, but for the games that they do have, you're already getting close to the point where it feels a little strangely real when you're in them. And things will happen that defy the laws of physics, and your brain will short circuit a little bit. And you get this thing called the VR giggles, where you don't know how to do anything else but laugh in the face of something that just makes absolutely no sense to your mind, seeing it in this context of, full visual immersion. It's very cool.
Very interesting. I had not heard of that term before. I'll keep that one in mind.
Yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun. If people want to find you online or see what you're up to, what you're working on, do you have a good place they can go?
LinkedIn, that's my home. LinkedIn.com/IN. I'm not sure why they're adding that, but /IN/Chris Chaney. Or you can just look on LinkedIn, type in the search button, Chris Chaney. There's a good chance I might be the first person that comes up.
We'll include a link to you in the show notes too, so that'll help people find you.
Yes. I'm hoping I should be the first person that comes up.
If your LinkedIn SEO is on point, then you should be good.
It's pretty decent, I've been told. So, but really enjoyed this, Nat. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, this just, I mentioned way back that it comes down to people. And I just reiterate that, right? Whether the business partners, networking connections, friends you make, or networking connections that become friends in your industry and my industry that tell you about an interesting opportunity that leads to the biggest deal of your career, which actually happened. That to me is everything. The underlying fiber web is all about people.
Well, in that note, we'll have to get together again, maybe in person next time, maybe if I'm back in Texas or you come to New York. But thank you again, Chris. This was a lot of fun, and have a great rest of your week.
Yes, you do the same. Thanks again for having me. We'll talk soon.
Definitely. Cheers.
Bye, Nat. Be well. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nateliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts, so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.